Well, good morning and welcome to the React Learning Series. My name is Vanessa Brewer. I am the Regional Interagency Council Program Administrator, and my co-host is Kelly Dorman. Kelly is the Child Welfare Liaison Program Administrator, and we both work at the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. We want to thank you for joining us today. Today's session includes a panel of various system of care partners and community advocates who will be sharing information on LGBTQ plus laws, resources, and supports for youth. And we have Mr. Beck Whipple. He is our suicide prevention coordinator at the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities, who has graciously agreed to facilitate the session today. Before I turn it over to Beck and our panelists for them to introduce themselves, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. So just to let you know, this workshop will be recorded and posted on the REACT's Resources and Trainings channel. We will put that link in the chat box a little bit later on. If you haven't already, please mute your mics. If you have questions during the session, please feel free to put them in chat. Our chat messages will be shared with our designated co-host this morning. And also, we do have time carved out at the end for Q&A. That part of the session will not be recorded. Also, we have a session evaluation link that's going to be posted in the chat box towards the end of the session. So please take a moment to complete it at that time. And as always, certificates of attendance are available by request. You can email me if you'd like to have one of those, and I'll put my email address in the chat box as well a little bit later on. So without further delay, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Beck.
Good morning, all. Can everyone hear me okay? I think we did the mic check earlier, but just wanted to confirm. So yeah, my name is Beck Whipple. I use he, him, his pronouns, and am here to just facilitate this conversation with an incredible group of brilliant minds and folks that are just kind of living in this time and day, and not just living but thriving. So I want to start with introductions, and so I'm going to ask our panelists to say their name, kind of who and how they're showing up, how they're showing up in this space, and kind of who they're maybe representing, if it's an organization or themselves. So I'm also going to throw in a little twist for you all panelists, which I haven't told you about. But if you could also tell us something that is bringing you joy right now. It could be something about yourself, something about your family, but just something that's bringing a smile to your eye, or a twinkle to your eye, a little something to lighten the step. And I'll start, and I'm going to say my great nieces, and also my godson, Jack, who maybe Courtney will mention. I don't know. But yeah, just these small folks who are just thriving and being loved on by incredible parents right now is bringing me joy. So I will start with Keith, and then we'll go Andrew, Courtney, and Melissa.
Hello, I'm Keith Elston. I'm the legal director and the founder of the Kentucky Youth Law Project. We provide services, legal services and advocacy for LGBTQ plus children and youth throughout the state. And the thing that brings me joy right now, I used to be a musician, and I really love jazz music. So my 14-year-old has now decided that he wants to be a jazz musician in his career. And he plays alto and bari sax at Henry Clay High School. Yay, Blue Devils! And he's loving it, and he's got some talent there too. So that gives me joy.
Thank you, Keith. And yeah, I was going to offer earplugs, but it sounds like maybe you don't need them. So awesome. Andrew?
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Alvey. I'm a policy and advocacy analyst at Kentucky Youth Advocates. I focus on child welfare policy. And the thing that is bringing me joy, it's like way more immediate for me, is that tomorrow, one of my friends and I are celebrating our birthday. So we're doing like a distillery tour. So we'll be going to several distilleries tomorrow. And that's what's bringing me joy right now, is thinking about that instead of work.
We won't bring up that means you're an Aries, right? Okay, yeah, we won't bring that up because that's joy for some Aries. But yeah, just joking. Yeah, Aries are amazing. Courtney.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Courtney Ham. I use she, her, hers. I am representing Aetna Better Health of Kentucky. I'm the crisis administrator there. I'm also the LGBTQ subject matter expert for that plan. And I'm here representing them, myself, my community as an LGBTQ person. And Jack, Beck already got there, but Jack is my 11-month-old son who's also an Aries. He will turn 1 in 2 weeks. So yes, I also have to get used to the Aries in my life. And he's bringing me a lot of joy, even though we're working on molars, I think, and I think we have a cold. So everyone just keep me in your thoughts and bring all the patience that you can. So, and I'm happy to be here. So thank you.
Thanks, Courtney. And last but definitely not least, Melissa.
Good morning. My name is Melissa Benson, she, her. I am one of the 2 co-founders and the board chair of Camp Beacon. We're a LGBTQ plus summer camp for teens in the state of Kentucky. And the thing that is bringing me joy is my daughter, Rowan, who was supposed to be here today but is not feeling well, just turned 16, and we're supposed to be going bowling as a family if we can dodge these storms to celebrate my little Aries child. I have an Aries husband and I'm a Cancer, so like keep me in your thoughts.
Yes, so thank you, Melissa, and all of our healing thoughts to Rowan. As yeah, she gets feeling better. So today we're going to just be kind of in this space, and as much as yeah we want to kind of live into the joy, it's not it does not fall lightly on us that it's not joyful times all the times. And so I just want to do a moment of silence if we could, for just like what's happening, but also weather, rain, what all that means for us. So we'll just take a moment and kind of hold that in our thoughts. Thank you all. Thank you. Okay, so first up, since the kind of the order is mostly just I'm gonna ask questions and we're gonna, be enlightened by these incredible folks. And then also if you have a question or something you want to put in, please put it in the chat and Kelly will elevate it to those of us on the panel. And so we'll start with a legal question. So kind of to Andrew and or Keith. What are the current laws in Kentucky and maybe even potentially nationally regarding LGBTQ plus individuals, youth, adults, and what do you think we'll start with that. What are the current laws we're looking at right now?
Andrew, you want to go first?
I'll let you talk about the specific laws, and I kind of talk more about the some of what the data is saying about the impact of them.
Perfect. Okay. Well, there are a lot of different areas that impact LGBTQ youth, and I'm mostly talking about LGBTQ youth under the age of 25 because that's really the population that I work with most of the time. I am a lawyer and I have a private practice too, but this nonprofit work is really taking over my time hugely lately. So there are unique challenges that LGBTQ youth face with schools, families, communities, and all of those play significant roles in how that impacts our young people. Let me start with the school-related concerns. There are a bunch of them. Bullying and harassment obviously is an important issue. Kentucky Department of Education, assuming it stays around for a little while longer, emphasizes the importance of creating inclusive environments for all students, including those who identify as LGBTQIA+. However, the state lacks a comprehensive anti-bullying law that explicitly protects students based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And freedom of expression. The enactment of Senate Bill 150, which was in the 2023 legislative session, has raised concerns about the rights of LGBTQIA plus students in the state. The law restricts discussions on gender identity and sexual orientation in schools, potentially limiting students' ability to express their identities openly or to get information that will help them to understand the world that they're negotiating. There are privacy and confidentiality concerns too. Some pieces of legislation in the past, and they keep on cropping up, and so far they've only kind of passed muster in the legislature here. But they propose that school personnel notify parents if a student expresses a gender identity different from their sex assigned at birth or seeks related health services. This could compromise students' privacy, especially if they're not ready to disclose their identity to their families. And you know what the folks who have passed these kinds of laws have done particularly well is try to co-opt language so that they create these arguments that sound like they're completely normal and that nobody should object to those things. And one of those, an important one, is parents' rights, because everybody believes that parents have rights to direct the lives of their children. And nobody would argue with that. It's a crucial role that parents play in a child's development. Schools have a responsibility, however, to protect the safety and well-being of students as well. For some children, especially those who are exploring or questioning their gender identity, being outed to their parents without their consent can lead to emotional distress, rejection, or even abuse. And homelessness is a frequent response to this. The priority must be the student's safety. If a student is not ready to share this part of their identity with their family, it may be because they fear negative consequences, and maybe they have a good reason to fear those negative consequences. Maybe they don't, but you know, I remember as a young gay man just coming out, I was terrified of my family, who ultimately were very supportive of me. Um, but it was a very difficult time for me to actually sit down with them and come out to them. You know, it's still a difficult thing for young people to deal with. It takes them a while to do it, and they need to be able to have the ability and the autonomy to be able to come out on their own timeline to the people that they care about, and not be outed and forced out by somebody who's playing an administrative role in a school somewhere. Pronouns and name usage. Senate Bill 150 permits school employees to use pronouns that align with the student's biological sex, even if it contradicts the student's gender identity, and that potentially leads to misgendering of the student. They haven't gone so far as to say that school employees will use the name that the student was given at birth. However, you know, it's giving license to the folks who are intentionally trying to misgender students and other them in their classrooms. And so that's become a real dangerous thing for these young people, because they may not be out to anybody in their school either. I mean, there are a number of young people who go stealth, which means that they pass, and therefore they are able to present as the gender they identify with, and not necessarily the gender they were assigned at birth. And so it's by allowing school personnel to intentionally misgender these students, it outs them to the students, and it's just as bad as, or almost as bad as outing them to their families. And so we have concerns about that. Bathroom and locker room access, and this is the big bugaboo, because everybody is just freaked out that there might be a transgender person in the bathroom that they're going to be using. And there have been proposals to give somebody a right of action against the school district if somebody goes into let's say a women's restroom and there is a transgender woman in there, they can sue the school district for that. In some cases, it's not in every case, but in some of the laws that have been passed, that is certainly a concern. Participation in sports is another one. There are like maybe 10 athletes throughout the country that are identified as transgender athletes. And we are spending an incredibly massive amount of time worrying that one of these athletes is going to actually do a little bit better than another athlete who was assigned the gender identity that they actually relate to. And we have somebody from the University of Kentucky who graduated from the University of Kentucky who has made a career of going around bashing transgender people, transgender athletes in particular, about that. And just so that you're aware, if you aren't already, this person from University of Kentucky who's a swimmer came in fifth, and the transgender person that came in fourth, I think, was the one that she's upset about because that means that she didn't do as well. And it's because she thinks that the transgender woman who was competing in that event knocked her out of some sort of advantage that she should have had in that. And so she's going around the country telling people how horrible transgender athletes are and why we should discriminate against them. And curriculum and inclusive education. We're seeing a lot of this with the current anti-DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I add on there belonging, because I think that that's equally as important as the diversity, equity, and inclusion part, because we want all young people to feel like they belong. And the policies and the laws that have been passed so far in the past few years are making it so that it's very, very difficult for these young people to feel like they belong. In fact, they're feeling like they are being marginalized and thrown out of society right now. They're feeling like, to use the language that is popular right now, they're feeling erased. And I think that's exactly what is happening here. They're trying to erase them from every single part of our lives, and in the hopes that somehow they'll go away. Well, they won't go away. So there's family and home related concerns as well. I'm not going to touch on every one of these, but forced outing through the parental notification I just mentioned. Family rejection is a big one. A lot of young people who come out as LGBTQIA plus to family members have some real negative reactions from family members, including asking them to leave the home or making their lives so miserable that they run away. And I've represented young people who've run away from home because they were being neglected and abused in their homes by parents who didn't support them. Foster care and homelessness. There's a huge overrepresentation of LGBTQIA plus kids in foster care right now, and that is a significant concern. I think that the Cabinet for Health and Family Services is doing a much better job than they used to do in addressing these issues. It's just a world difference, because I remember back, I used to be an attorney that did dependency, neglect, and abuse cases, and I represented a couple of folks who were LGBTQ identified, and I had workers actually tell me that they didn't have any LGBTQ folks in care throughout the state. And we knew that wasn't true, but they didn't believe that they had them because nobody was focusing on these kids. That has changed dramatically, and I'm very happy to see that. Um, and then there's the access to gender affirming healthcare, which was cut out of the of being used through the Senate Bill 150 from 2023. Now, anyone who's under the age of 18 cannot get any kind of gender affirming care, really. They can't get puberty blockers, which help them to not develop the secondary sex characteristics that they would end up having to change through surgery later on in their lives. Plus, the biggest thing is it gives them the ability to put off having to declare themselves as being, transgender or gender non-conforming, conforming for a little bit longer until they are more confident of who they really are. And that's the main reason for the puberty blockers. It also bans hormone therapies and surgeries, although surgeries were very rare in Kentucky and actually all over the country. There were a few top surgeries that were being done around, but it was always based on the best interest of the patient who was suffering from gender dysphoria frequently, and they were at a point where they were self-harming themselves, and it was a safer thing for them to get the top surgery. There's no bottom surgeries going on, and the whole notion that small children are being subjected to surgeries to change them into another gender is just a complete fabrication. Then let me just touch a few on community and social issues. Employment discrimination is a big problem for young LGBTQ plus people, but particularly for transgender people, because even though there's a Supreme Court decision, Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, that said that discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity is sex discrimination under the federal laws that address employment discrimination. And that happened pretty recently, actually. And now we're seeing that they're trying to roll that back a little bit. There's also fairness laws throughout the state of Kentucky in a number of different communities that provide some protection from discrimination for LGBTQIA plus individuals of all ages. There's a potential for housing and public accommodations issues. Transgender folks just have a really difficult time finding employment and housing. It's because, and I speak to this not only as somebody who represents a lot of them and works with the transgender and gender nonconforming community quite a bit, but also I have a daughter who's in her 30s who's a transgender woman, and she struggles to get and keep jobs once they find out she has been sexually harassed in the workplace, and she was the one who got punished for the sexual harassment that occurred to her. That happens. It's very common that happens right now. So we need more laws that actually do protect people on the basis of their gender identity here in the state. I've already mentioned access to health care. Legal identification documents is a big issue. Transgender folks are allowed to change their names, and I'm going to mention that, but I'll just throw that out there now. They're allowed to change their names. Frequently, they are not allowed to change their gender identity, gender markers on their identification because they have the state law requires that they have surgeries. They complete the surgical process in order to get their gender marker changed. And because young people cannot change their gender because they can't get the surgeries, they are put in more risk if, for example, they are pulled over by a police officer and the name that they have on their driver's license, which they've legally changed, does not align with the gender marker on the driver's license. they can actually be detained and put into a holding facility in a jail while all that's sorted out. That is extremely dangerous for these young people because they put all sorts of folks into holding cells, and the holding cells are not usually single individual holding cells. They are group holding cells, and that makes it very, very difficult for them if it gets out that they are there because of their gender identity status. Passports were allowed to change the gender marker without having to go through all that rigmarole. But now under the current federal administration, that's no longer allowed. They are, according to the edicts, they are either male or female, and that is only associated with the gender they were assigned at birth. So I've mentioned police and juvenile issues, so I won't get into that. Gender transition, they up till now, and I think that we still have the ability to do it now, young transgender folks are allowed to do what's called socially transitioning. So that means they might change their hairstyle, they might change their clothing to more closely match their gender identity. They might use a preferred name that's different than the name on their identification if they haven't already gotten the thing legally changed, their names legally changed. And they might use different pronouns than the ones that were aligned with their sex assigned at birth. They're allowed to do that. As I mentioned, they're not allowed to receive medical transition services in the state at this point. Insurance coverage is a real crapshoot. There's not a lot of insurance that covers transition services, particularly. It's all out of pocket. If you were to get the surgeries, they're like, I think it's 16 different surgeries that kind of comprise a complete list of the surgical procedures that are available. You have to pay for most of those out of your own pocket. We're talking about well over $100,000 to get that done. Most people don't have that lying around that they can just give to the hospitals to get that done. So they are not able to get the surgical transition done that's required to get gender marker changes. And you know, that creates a lot of problems. Plus, I must say, not every transgender person wants or needs to have their gender changed or have the gender affirming surgeries. And so it really, I think it's gatekeeping on the part of the state to try to restrict what transgender people are allowed to do in the state, even adults. Conversion therapy is always a big issue right now. Governor Beshear signed an executive order last fall that restricted the use of state funds for any conversion therapy services because conversion therapy is abusive, it's dangerous, and it's completely discredited by virtually every single medical and psychological association in the country. But this legislative session that just ended produced House Bill 495, which overturns the governor's executive order, but it goes even farther. It basically says that conversion therapists can get reimbursement from the state for their services, whether they are licensed or unlicensed, and so that the reason they allow the unlicensed ones is so that they can get pastors who want to do this work to be able to get paid for it. And they also went even farther than that and said that under state law now, transgender people of any age are barred from having Medicaid funding reimburse them for any of the transition services or any gender affirming care services. So that's another issue we're dealing with. And that's pretty much the landscape of the law here in the state. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get through it, but there's a whole lot of stuff here that needs to be gotten through. And the last little caveat I'll say is things are changing rapidly in these areas. And so if you have questions about this, you should consult with somebody who is an expert on these kinds of issues, because what we talk about here today may change in the next legislative session. It may change with the next federal executive order from the current president. So there you go.
Thank you, Keith. A couple other impacts we've seen from SB 150 being implemented was that it restricted certain trainings in schools, particularly child sexual abuse trainings. Luckily, that's been hopefully remedied by this year's Senate Bill 181. An amendment was included to make sure that child sexual abuse trainings could still be taught in schools. And then a big impact we've seen is data collection, because it switched kind of all surveys from being opt out to opt in, which has significantly hurt the way that we collect data in schools. Since we kind of talked a lot about what the specific Kentucky laws are, I'm going to kind of talk about what the data is saying about the impact of those laws. We see that 94% of LGBTQ young people say that their well-being was negatively impacted due to recent politics in Kentucky. And that 56% of LGBTQ young people reported that they or their family have considered leaving Kentucky for another state because of the politics and the laws that are being implemented, including 67% of transgender and non-binary young people and families. Also kind of talking about that accessing mental health care, 50% of queer and trans young people are not able to access the mental health care in the past year that they needed, despite the fact that we know they have increased rates of anxiety and depression. 66% experience anxiety, 56% experience depression, and that 43% in Kentucky seriously considered suicide in the past year. So the people who need mental health care the most are not able to access it, or are too afraid to access it due to the policies, the stigma that is in place in Kentucky. Keith mentioned conversion therapy. 12% of LGBTQ young people in the state were threatened with conversion therapy in the past year, while 6% were subjected to it. And then only 43% of queer and trans young people in Kentucky say that their community where they live is accepting of them. So we kind of see like a general kind of bias forming against them, and it doesn't help whenever the people in power kind of support that bias. We see it kind of across the US that whenever laws are put into place, bullying of queer and trans youth in schools increases because it's on the media. They see like, okay, well, my parents support this politician who says that they're not people, so I don't have to view them as people. So we kind of see increased bullying in states. 60% of youth aged 13 to 17 report being bullied due to their sexuality or gender identity. So kind of just the trend that we're seeing is that in conservative states, things are getting worse compared to in states where there is laws against discrimination, in states where they're not actively kind of like attacking a very small group of people just for being who they are. And so we can get to kind of more of the resources and support to help with what the data says. I'll pass it back to Beck.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith and Andrew, for Keith, for bringing in your own experiences. I think these are so important to both our lived experience as well as our familial experiences. So thank you for sharing your sexuality and your family and how. So I think that using our voices in this way is particularly impactful, but also at this point, it's maybe not always safe. And so I just want to kind of put that out there too of yeah. So thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Keith. And for those that are on here, let's take a deep breath and just remind ourselves that it doesn't have to be this way. doesn't have to be this way. It's just my mantra right now. Um, so I want to transition to resources, because I think that is really important right now, is to kind of just flood our young people and their families with just resources, support, and love. So this is to anybody on the panel, but what services and or supports are available for LGBTQ plus youth and their families right now in the Commonwealth and maybe even nationally?
I'll start, and then if anybody wants to piggyback off of that when I'm finished. Well, I guess the natural place for me to begin will be with Camp Beacon, right? Because that's why I'm here. In 2021, Jess Cleveland and I co-founded Camp Beacon. We had our first year of campers in 2023 because it took some time, to build this as a project. It basically started as a conversation between the two of us when I was looking for an LGBTQ camp for my own child. She had been researching some and saw that they were very far away from us, and also economically not feasible for our family, in that they were not free and required a lot of travel in order to get her to those. And Jess and I had met through the Mom Hugs group that she was spearheading in Lexington. And, I just reached out to her and said, hey, do you know of any camps that are closer, in this region? Because I'm looking for something for, my child. And we did some digging and we didn't find anything. And we just kept talking about it. And we're like, is this crazy idea or can we just make a camp? And I'm a project manager professionally. So I love a good project. So we went ahead and put our heads together and reached out to people with different areas of expertise. Like we have a health services team that has a nurse for camp, that has some therapists, people with, different experiences that can help us, build this. And so we serve teens ages 13 to 17. And this will be our third year. But that is a summer experience. It's a quick, approximate week of being able to be yourself in a space. It's otherwise a very typical summer camp experience. And then we thought, well, how can we try to connect youth, all year long? So we did start a Discord, and our camp director and some other adults monitor that space to make sure that it is safe and there's nothing inappropriate, going on in that digital space. It's monitored at all times. We have let some youth around the state who have not been campers join that after we do like a quick intake with them to make sure that they really are LGBTQ youth and that the parents are aware that they're participating and all of that, just to make sure we don't have bad actors, joining under false pretenses and things. Schools used to have GSAs, but I think that's going to become increasingly rare and more complicated with all of the things that are being thrown at public schools. So I'm not sure what the status of that is. I do know that there used to be a statewide GLSEN, and that is no longer in existence, I believe, and that's a hard, hit for us as a state. Regionally, there are some good groups. Louisville Youth Group has a very active group that goes on all year long. PFLAG in Danville is trying to start like a teen group, and then Lexington Pride Center has one as well. And then there are some resources for homeless LGBTQ youth and young adults. So like ages 18 to 24, as Keith mentioned, that is a high at-risk population for being unhoused. And so some that I'm aware of are Arbor Youth in Lexington, Sweet Evening Breeze in Louisville, Mountain Haven, and Carita's House. So those are all some that I'm aware of that are just, some spaces that are safe for our kids. I worry more about our youth in rural counties not having these types of supports. I live in a rural county, and there is really nothing here for LGBTQ youth. And you know, it hurts me because it's 2025. I was a queer teen in the 90s when nobody told people um, about their sexuality. And I had hoped that by this point, I'm almost 50 years old, that we would be beyond this level of discrimination. And sadly, we're not. So I really think that these safe spaces for our youth are going to be really important over the next period of their lives. It's going to be life-giving to them. So I'll pause and maybe somebody else has some spaces I don't know about.
Thank you, Melissa. You covered a great deal of every single thing. I also wanted to point out though that individuals, us, can be safe places. Allies, of course, and then those of us who can, um, you know, somehow identify ourselves to a young person who we may see struggling. They might be struggling with depression and anxiety, but there might be something going on underneath that, right? So I think it's important that we, ask the questions and allow youth to let us know, or allow us to let youth know that we're a safe place first and foremost. And of course, that's for our kids, but that's also for young people that we are in community with. I also want to give a shout out to back in all the team at DBHGID with 988. And 988 has become at least from our standpoint at Aetna Better Health, our number one resource to go to for crisis, and not just for suicide ideation, right, but for definitely if we have crisis, for our LGBTQ youth, and we make sure that all staff understands that is a resource for them. And it's great to have 988 rather than just saying, oh, call the Trevor Project, right? 988 allows things to be more streamlined and is actually just a quicker thing to say and quicker thing to explain. So I did want to shout out them. Another organization is the Kentucky Health Justice Network. They have a very extensive trans health, what is it called? A spreadsheet, sorry, a resource spreadsheet, but also for LGBTQ. The staff that works there are very open and available. And they're also social workers like me. So finding them as resources is a big deal. Of course, it is important to note, right, that Louisville, Lexington has been noted. Covington does have a lot of LGBTQ people and families and youth, but I don't know of a specific resource there. But there are different pockets around the state, and it's important that we continue to just share individually, so young people can see that we're here and that we're safe for them.
I'd just like to jump in real quick on this. Mostly, Melissa was talking about emergency shelters for young LGBT folks, which is really vital. But as she mentioned, it's like from 18 to 23, 25 years old. So what happens with the kids who are under the age of 18 and they run away and they need help? What we've discovered is that the shelters are required to notify their parents immediately. Now, if it's the parent who's abusing or neglecting the child, then that becomes a real danger point for some of these kids, because they could be sent right back to the abuser's home. And so that's a concern right there. We've been trying to work with the cabinet on that for several years now, and unfortunately, it's going to require legislation to save the environment for that here, unfortunately.
Thanks, Keith, for bringing that up. Absolutely. And I think there's some upstream ways to build relationships with young people that, they could offer a third alternative or fourth alternative, hopefully. So, and I do know, that we are working on that at the cabinet level. So, what are some things, kind of coming back to our questions? There are almost 34, there's 40 folks here now. So thanks for taking time out of your day to be here. So what would you all say to the 40 folks on how to be an ally, how to show up, how to support young folks and their families. Because I think if you know, if you're a parent and your child is being harmed, you are also being harmed. And so I just want to kind of say that. But what do you think are ways that kind of big pie in the sky ways of being an ally, and then also just kind of smaller ways to do that? And I'll just open it up to any of the four of y'all. And I see Melissa's off.
Yeah, I just wanted to share some things that my daughter was going to talk about if she had been able to join us today. So, one of her asks is don't comply in advance. So, like, if your workplace or organization has not told you you cannot do X thing or you will get fired, don't remove your pronouns from your email and your Zoom and things. These visual markers are really important to, I think, youth and families. As I mentioned, my daughter's not here today because of her health. She's got some complex medical issues, and we're involved in 3 different healthcare systems, like to manage her care. So at the different facilities, whether it be UK or Norton's or Cincinnati Children's, there are people who have visual markers on their badges that let us know that they are LGBTQ affirming folks. And I can see her visibly relax when she sees that. So I think that those visuals are still very important. And just, you know, if your visual reactions, like they're clocking those. So like when my when my daughter has like a piece of jewelry on, and people will say, oh, I love that piece of jewelry. Where did you get it? She'll say, oh, my girlfriend gave it to me. And then she watches people's faces to see. And even if people don't say aggressive things to her, sometimes the facial expression gives their personal belief away. Like they'll have like a visible reaction that they don't then verbalize, but she can tell that they're not a safe person. So she does recognize the fact that these are, complicated times and people have their livelihood, and every person has to make a decision as to where their red line is what they will and won't do in service of their employment. But, just don't comply in advance. That's what she wanted to say.
I wanted to jump in. Thank you so much, Melissa, on behalf of your wonderful child. And that gave me chills when you said that, because working at a bigger organization, as someone who has really only been out at this place of work, has only used pronouns at this place of work, has only, self-ID'd here. I think it is incredibly important to see those things. And I think throughout my, my life before I came out, I was just always scanning for safety, which is something I didn't even recognize until I came out, right? So I think it's really, really important. If you can't just blatantly say, yeah, I'm cool, right? I'm a safe space, right? Then having those signifiers, using correct language, educating yourself as much as you can as an ally. The language is not that hard. People get really caught up on acronyms and all that stuff. These are just human beings who happen to identify possibly different from you, and that is it's really a normal thing. I also wanted to point out too, when we're talking about at the individual level, no one has to be an expert to be a safe space for someone. You don't have to know everything. And in fact, the curiosity, as long as it's coming from, a warm and supportive place, is really important. Asking questions like, hey, is that the name that you want to go by, right? Is that those the pronouns that you want to use, right? Making these things very normal as a part of conversation. It's similar to how we're talking about suicide ideation, right? The word suicide should come off your tongue just as easily as breakfast, right? Just to normalize these conversations. And yes, don't comply in advance. I'm going to take that back with me, of course, to my team as well. Continue to share those resources, and I'll pause there.
I also want to loop back and say that it's important to understand with LGBTQ youth that when they show up in spaces, that their queer identity is not their only identity. And so how can you also honor their other identities, particularly if they're marginalized identities? So, are they BIPOC youth as well? Are they disabled? Are they neurodiverse? Like, what are these other entry points? And so we think a lot about that and talk a lot about that at Camp Beacon. Like, our mission is to create a safe, affirming, and fun camp. And so we want to affirm all of their identities and make it safe for them to show up as a whole person. And so I will also say sometimes allyship can be a little bit exhausting for us. Like, we love our allies and we want and need our allies, but sometimes it's important to remember what your place is as an ally. So your place as an ally is to amplify the voices of LGBTQ folks, not to talk for them or over them. I try as a person who's in the community to speak from my own personal experience and not speak for all LGBTQ people, and I'm in the community. So that's just another thing that I would say as far as being a support to youth is amplify their voices. We have youth leadership, on our team. We have a young adult, not child, but young adult member on our board. So just keeping their voices centered in this work is also really important to me. It's building camp with LGBTQ youth and not for them.
Thank you so much, Melissa and Courtney. I just want to add to just on a Beck level. Yeah, just kind of also not assuming that I mean, it is hard right now. It is hard to be a, queer person in the world right now. And it's not just hard. There are, so like I think as much as we can to um divorce the social aspect from the individual experience, and like how can we because that negative social or that hard social aspect isn't about my identity. It's about the social interpretation of my identity. And so I think anytime that we talk about these things, that we're not talking about suicide rates for queer kids because they're queer. We're talking about it because of the social factors that are related to making it hard to be a trans or queer youth. And so that's the thing that I can like want to just really elevate is not the identity which gets so much attention. It's really the kind of the seeds that have been planted, and even the positive discord. And I want to echo Melissa's point of like it's hard to it's hard sometimes to, I just was at a restaurant eating chicken nuggets, like, or eating chicken strips, like just minding my business. And the two other folks in the restaurant took it upon themselves to have a very loud conversation about, trans athletes. And it's like, I just am trying to eat chicken. And so like it's not complicated to be an ally. It's like sometimes it's just to not say anything negative, or to not indulge in the dialogue in a way that is like public, or you don't know who's around you. And so I just want to say that in a way of like sometimes allyship means like just letting people eat chicken. And if you're not the athlete swimming against another athlete, like mind your business, mind your business. And so I just wanted to kind of add that, and hopefully, that makes sense. And so that kind of brings me to this next question, and to step back into my facilitator role, Cone. So, kind of thinking about that, places to eat chicken or places to just be. Would you guys mind to explain to the group kind of what third spaces are, and what those look like, and how important they are, and how we can maybe as a group could work together to build those third spaces?
I'll start with that. Because again, I think that was something Ron was going to talk about. Um, if you haven't heard of that term before, it was first coined by sociologist Ray Oldenburg. And a third space is literally a social space beyond your primary and secondary spaces. So your primary space is your home. A secondary space would be school or work. It's basically any place that you don't have to be, that you go there intentionally. So for youth, that can look like coffee shops, comic book places where you play D&D with people. They have a lot of online spaces, and let's face it, that's where this youngest generation is finding the most social connection, having grown up through the pandemic when that was their only option. Libraries are really important third spaces. And so I think it's really important to, have these businesses and community orgs that are welcoming spaces, both to have LGBTQ only spaces where they maybe can form social connections, but also just spaces where the whole community is there and everyone is honored and welcome in their identities. I think that sense of belonging is really important for them, and it's going to become really important community work that I think we can all do in order to provide these spaces in the world that we're in right now. And we can even think about that through our different abilities to connect with advocacy. So I'm on the Partnership for a Resilient Kentucky Advisory Board. And so they look to me for some feedback on how we can help LGBTQ youth in particular, even though that is not their overall mission. So just thinking about how can you show up in the space where you are an advocate for youth. And I'll pause there.
Thanks, Melissa. Keith, Courtney, Andrew, do you have anything you'd want to add to that?
This is my first experience hearing that term third space. So I'm definitely going to do some Googling. So I appreciate Melissa's explanation of that. It sounds very familiar though, as a person who grew up in the closet, right? Finding, an English teacher, right? Who's being affirming and open, or finding, a group in college, right? Things like that. And then finding, of course, my own, chosen family outside of my personal family, or my blood relatives. So it rings, it resonates. And so I appreciate Melissa speaking to that.
And this is from kind of like the perspective of not like my current job, but whenever I was getting my master's, I did a lot of research on kind of like the power of shared social advocacy, especially, and I looked at like for like LGBTQ plus youth. And whenever like people are like working together as a community, you see decreased rates of like anxiety, depression. You feel like you see like increased like self-efficacy of like that they are accomplishing something. So what I did was I had like these like little workshops with social work students that were just kind of teaching the social workers on how to teach people to become advocates. Just because we know that if someone's advocating for themselves, that they're going to have better outcomes than if they kind of like give up, which is very easy to do whenever you feel like the whole world's working against you.
I love that. Thank you, Andrew. And I got you just an example of this. So I'm working with a grant in Western Kentucky, and the grant is specifically for older persons, like so to reduce suicide rates around among 65 and older rural Kentuckians. And our coordinator had this brilliant idea to work with beta clubs in high schools to do a letter campaign. So they just like the beta club learned a little bit about like what it means to like potentially have like social isolation, have maybe some of your loved ones pass away before you, like, as like, so they kind of were given some of the like, what does it maybe potentially look like to be an older person who's isolated and more at risk? And they wrote the most amazing cards and letters. And then these letters are going to be delivered with meal delivery. So in addition to their meals, these older persons who again are more isolated are going to get these handwritten, handcrafted, like very artistically designed cards. And I was like, it's just a little bit of thing like that of just like thinking about someone else, thinking about their experiences, and then just letting them know that. And I just love that as just a simple kind of coming together, because that's one of the biggest protective factors, like Andrew mentioned, for suicide is connectedness. And it can be connectedness around an identity, it can be connected around a cause. And so I really appreciate you bringing that up, Andrew. And yeah, so write a card to someone, just drop a note, do something, Also, fire departments are really overfed. So what I'm hearing from fire departments is to not advocate for people to bring food to them, even though that is a natural instinct for me. So just check in with your fire department if you want to support them other than calorically. All right. So I want to come back to the questions. I'm sorry, so hard to not jump into the conversations because y'all are bringing up such great points. I want to kind of wrap us up, so make sure we have a little bit of time for questions. I'll just move us into kind of our adult space of like, how do we work within our own workforces and our potentially our own kind of adult community spaces, to bring awareness and also to potentially increase the number of resources and allies and champions within maybe our workforces, our community um, places.
I think I'll jump in. So when I think about my workspace, right, which has become virtual, right, over the last 3 or 4 years, and I think about staff meetings and where we have social workers, mental health providers, and I'm talking at our MCOs, specifically Aetna. Um, and I think one of the biggest places we can do advocacy is sometimes in those meetings, right? So sometimes if we're having like a case round, right? So we're bringing up a young person. Here's what's happening. Here's their medications. Here's what's happening in their life, in their home life, in their school, and things like that. And everyone is trying to give them resources, right? When you hear someone say, well, they call themselves Ted, but their real name is, right? Or they're going by these pronouns, but they're actually, right? That is a good spot to interrupt. Especially for a young person, we need to be as flexible as possible when they're trying to understand their own sexual orientation or gender identity. That does not just go for LGBTQ people, right? Or young people. It goes for everyone. Everyone, between the ages of 12 to 24 are trying to understand themselves, right? So we need to really normalize the idea that being very flexible in those spaces, even though it says check the box male, female, right? Check the box this, right? We can be flexible, not doing that complying in advance, and just saying that out loud, saying, well, they go by this name and this is the name that they use, right? Just being very affirmative about it. You don't have to explain it about them. You don't have to out them. But you do, especially for young people, I hear this rigidity with caseworkers, case managers. They want to put them in a box. They want to understand them. And honestly, that's not our job. Our job is not to understand them. Our job is to advocate for them and to bring them through the system safely. And their safety has to be our number one priority with every piece of them. Whether it be a disability, whether it be that they're in the foster care system, right, and they've been disrupted from their family, regardless of their circumstance, we're there to champion their safety. So I did definitely want to bring that up, because I think being flexible right now is one of the biggest ways that we can, show up for these youth. I'll pause there. Someone else can jump in.
All right. Thanks, Courtney. Yeah, just holding that space. And especially I think if that young person is around, not making that onus of them to have to correct that adult, but just really stepping in and saying, "Hey, Tim," or "Hey, like you said, Ted," like, or if that person is continually doing it, like making sure that they're kind of that's being addressed in front of the kid so they see and especially if you I think if you see kind of an intent there, if it's like a mistake and it happened, yeah, okay, but you all are adults, you can kind of see what that is, what that intent is, because you can definitely see it from the kid, like Melissa said, like you can see it from them, you can feel it from them, their responses. So I appreciate that. I also wanted to make sure we
Oh,
put in the
Beck,
chat. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
sorry, I wanted to mention one more thing. I do want to say that even if you can have an informal liaison for those young people, someone who you know is supportive for that community, sometimes just having that one touch or that one person, right, can be really important because what we're dealing with here is trust. So we want to make sure that there's at least one adult on staff that could be they could have a title, they could not, but they could be the one with the rainbow, on their badge and those kinds of things. At least having one person there. Therefore, it doesn't feel like, oh, we all have to do this, right? Or we all have to do this certain thing, right? Unfortunately, not everyone feels comfortable. But if there is a person who does feel comfortable being that liaison, I think it's really important. I love that, at Aetna, we have our subject matter experts. It's a cute little title. But what it means is that if a staff member has a question, they can just come to me and they can ask it whenever. And I am very open about whatever they want to ask. And that's really the key to getting them the resources that they need because especially with the transgender youth, people have what I found with our staff is that they have a hard time asking the question because they feel like they don't know how to ask the question. They don't know what they're asking and they don't know how to not quote unquote offend someone with asking the question. And so having a person who's here that says, okay, you can come to me, ask me whatever it is, right? We can move from there, I think is an important piece. And I forgot to say that. So thanks for letting me say that.
Yeah, so maybe like I kind of heard you say like as a workforce, like making sure that you have some clear directions of a subject matter expert or someone who is, identified, not just like, oh, I know Beck is trans, so let's just ask him all the trans questions. No, that's not what we're saying. Have someone or a group of someone's identified. And I wanted to kind of mention too that if you are a workforce that can't maybe explicitly have rainbows or explicitly do these kind of things that have been mentioned, work with community partners if possible to create really key indicators. Like if you put a thumb ring on a person in your pictures, I'm gonna know that that person is queer most likely. And like like there's just small visual cues sometimes that don't have to necessarily be a rainbow. But if you're not in the community, you're not gonna know those things. And so like just kind of thinking, not everybody's like, do I have a thumb ring on? But yeah, so just kind of thinking about some of that. And that also includes relationships, relationship buildings with your trusted community partners, and being good partners. So hopefully you're not in that spot. I did want to bring up one last thing that kind of came up in the chat, and Melissa indicated it earlier, but um, there are LGBTQ plus youth in rural Kentucky. There are, we know that, and so both things can exist. Someone can live in rural Kentucky and be queer or LGBTQ plus, however they identify. And there's sometimes for folks who live in the city like me or like Courtney, you know, there can kind of be like, why would you live there? Or, I would never say that, just saying. How do you still live there? And it's like, that's their home, that's their choice, right? Or maybe they don't have a choice. And that could sometimes lead to, if they do come to a city group or to an urban support, they get that double like, oh, you're from rural Kentucky, or like, so there could be where like the multiple intersecting identities aren't welcomed at the same time. So I just want to say that if you are in an urban area and are creating spaces, that the rural Kentuckians feel as safe there as possible as well. And so just to know that you have to potentially be explicit about that welcome. It can't just be an implied welcome. Um, I don't know, Melissa, if you would want to say anything more about that, but
Yes, I would. As someone who was, a rural queer teen, and maybe out to only a very few people back in the 90s, and then as someone who has LGBTQ teen now, I would say that there is a lot of regionalism. And even like in social media spaces, like our kids are a lot more aware of the news and the state of the world than what you would think. They learn a lot on Instagram and TikTok about, activism and things that are going on. And it's really hard in spaces to see things about rural Kentucky, like, well, you voted for this, so you get what you get. And well, don't assume that there aren't rural Democrats because we exist. But also, like, it's erasing historic marginalization of these areas, and maybe why people vote against what you would think are their best interests. There are systemic reasons for that. So I would just encourage people to punch up and not down. Critique systems, and maybe attack people less, because you're also not going to win anybody over with that language. We've been talked about like we're dumb hillbillies since forever. So it's really not moving the conversation forward. And there is, unfortunately, sometimes a divide between, even in the community, between LGBTQ folks in the urban and rural areas. And I hope to do some work in the future that will help build a bridge there. But thank you, Beck, for saying that, because regionalism is a thing. And we do have a tendency sometimes, when people outside of our state like to point the finger at Kentucky and how ignorant they think we are, we'll say, oh, it's not us, it's those people over there, right? Lexington will say, it's not us, it's Eastern Kentucky. And I've heard that in academic spaces. I'm a PhD candidate at UK, and I have heard some very troubling remarks made at times by people who should know better.
thank you, Melissa. So I'm gonna give just a couple, like if each of the panelists want to close out with one final thought, and then we can turn it over to the group for questions. We'll stop recording after you all do your closing remarks, and then Vanessa will stop recording, and you will hear it has stopped recording, and then you feel free to come off mute and ask the question if you'd like, or put it in the chat, and Kelly will grab it and verbalize it for you. So I'll start. Let's go the reverse way that we went. So Melissa, you want to start with the closing comment? We'll go Courtney, Andrew, and then Keith.
Sure. I want to say that, I would like to see there be a statewide clearinghouse at some point for resources for the community. I don't think anything like that currently exists. I'd be glad to be corrected if that is not the case. We do have a resources tab at campbeacon.org where we try to share resources with our families. So we're constantly adding to that. If you know of a place that isn't there that you would like to share with me, please feel free to do that. And I will have the volunteer that manages our our social media and website take care of that for us. But yeah, I think we just need more collaboration across organizations. And so I hope, to encourage people here to work with me and others to do that. And thank you for being here. If you took the time to be here to learn more about how to be an advocate, you made a choice, and I appreciate that.
I just really want to, send some appreciation out to DBHCID and Vanessa and Kelly and, Beck for doing such great moderation. It's just a really wonderful thing to have a space like this, given the current social environment that just continues to hit us harder and harder every single day, it feels like. So I just really appreciate that space. And then I will say that you know, if you're a parent of a young LGBTQ person or even a foster care parent, there are resources available. And I think it's important to ask those managers, ask those case managers, ask those staff, go ahead and ask the questions. We don't have the data. We would love to have the data, but we do not collect the data, right? So we don't have the numbers saying, oh, there's, 3,000 LGBTQ youth person, in foster care system, right? We would love to have those, but we don't. So regardless of that, we just want to make sure that if parents and advocates, ask those questions. And then also, one of my takeaways is just making sure that everyone still understands, right, that we're still doing this, right? That we're still here. Nothing stopped because there was a new president, and we still have a lot of work to do. So thank you for being here.
I was just going to add that we always talk at KOA about how it's important to note that kids and youth aren't able to vote. And a lot of times, if they go to their state legislator, they're a constituent, but they're not a voting constituent. So a lot of times their voices aren't heard. So it's up to like us as adults to protect our youth and advocate for things that benefit them and advocate against things that will harm them.
And I would just kind of echo what other people have said about allyship. Allyship is so crucial at a time, particularly when we're dealing with such difficult national and international issues right now, where parts of our community are being attacked, and we need to be aware that if those parts of our community are being attacked, that we're all vulnerable to being attacked. And so it's important that we stand up for not only ourselves, but for our siblings who are under attack right now. And that's, I mean, the only other thing I would say is that if we want a better world here, we're going to have to start by convincing the people who are making the laws in the state that we have to make changes to this. And they need to hear from all of us about this all the time, so that they know that their misinformation is not real. Let's put it that way. Thank you all for this. This has been really very good.
Thank you, Keith. And as you're